Okay. That was our Dropkick Murphys.
All right. Welcome everybody to our first Friday labor town hall roundtable discussing cuts versus raising revenue. Before we start, I'd just like to read our statement from the ALF about the current what's going on currently in the country. I was going to try to shorten it, but I think reading it in its entirety makes more sense. Labor will not allow ourselves to be divided along racial lines. Unfortunately, racial injustice has been a part of both America and labor's history. Racial and socioeconomic inequalities is often used as a means to divide and conquer us from one another. Today, we have an opportunity to stand with any community-based organization that's struggling against societal injustices, against racism, the racism that tears our neighborhoods apart. Hudson Valley Area Labor Federation is committed to racial equality and vows to fight against any racism in America wherever it's found. The HVALF believes that there must be justice and full recognition of human rights for all people in our country, regardless of race. All racial injustice impacts our human rights obligations as a nation, and we stand publicly against all forms of it. Our union and our membership are well diversified and serve as an example to everyone on how together we are stronger. We will not tolerate racial discrimination or attacks on any of our members or members of the public at large. Therefore, the Hudson Valley Area Labor Federation proudly supports the multitude of community-based organizations in their outrage and protest against any events that occur in our community based on the racism prevalent in today's society. The Hudson Valley Area Labor Federation believes that there must be justice and full recognition of human rights for people of all races in our country. The continued violence and discrimination faced by the Black community directly impacts the our human rights obligation as a nation. On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd from Minneapolis, Minnesota became another victim in a long line of public brutality of Black people in our nation and lost his life to it. History is full of examples of racism's paralyzing effect on the collective action in American human rights, civil rights, and workers' rights movements, and we must stand firmly against it. The modern labor movement must look to its past for inspiration, but must look ahead to do more. There is now empirical data that shows the broader societal policies perpetuating racism must be carefully analyzed, understood, and challenged. The Hudson Valley Area Labor Federation believes that all brothers and sisters in the House of Labor must confront racism in America everywhere it is found. We must join the anti-racist struggle to ensure that Black lives matter. Labor cannot flinch away from the stark reality of racism. Anti-racism must be understood as one of the vital union issues of our time, not merely a symbolic gesture or perennial support during the annual MLK holiday. Brothers and sisters, the House of Labor must confront racism in America everywhere it is found. Anti-racism policies and practices must be understood as a priority labor issue. Furthermore, standing against racism and injustice shall be adopted as the greater mission of the Hudson Valley Area Labor Federation. An injury to one is an injury to all. I'd like to thank Brother Pinto from the CWA for just making that motion and writing that statement. So today we'll be discussing budget cuts versus raising revenue. Like you, we are upset when we read in the newspapers or on TV about socialism for the rich and austerity for everyone else. For far too long, the only solution that seems to be acceptable or palatable are cuts to the institutions that make up the core of our communities: schools, hospitals, mental health facilities, nursing homes, and the postal service, even spending money to keep up our infrastructure. For many of our leaders who follow the Grover Norquist anti-tax policy, raising revenue has become a bad word. So as a result, our government either borrows money or raises fees to pay for our public services, both of which are bad long-term solutions. Fees are regressive. Everybody has to pay the same. You look at your phone bill, it's not based on your ability to pay. And loans are just, basically we're kicking the can down the road and making the future generations pay for the stuff we need today. Today we'll focus on changing the paradigm. And just like the civil rights justice movements and this anti-racist movements, we need to make our leaders a little uncomfortable. We have to push them out of their comfort zone. Because really, if we're not going to raise revenue now, when the state is in this $1 billion, in this hole that we're in, when will we raise revenue? When's is a good time? So today we have with us local leaders, community allies, public policy educators that will emphasize a long-term vision for our future as we face austerity as a false solution to address these budget shortfalls. Okay. I'm passing, now I'm going to introduce Donna Goodman, UUP, one of the co-chairs of our Education Committee.
Thank you, Sparrow, and thank you for reading out that whole statement. It was very powerful. This evening's forum is about the lack of funding for essential services and essential jobs and the hollowing out of the public sector. We're told that the only way to have a robust economy is to institute policies of austerity, budget cuts for the people so that the wealthy and big business can have greater profits. Budget cuts are a strategy for increasing inequality. Our panel will explore the effects of budget cuts on the public good and also explore an alternative, raising revenues. We know there's money in this richest country in the world. Where is that money? Why isn't it being used to meet people's needs, and how can we get it? We'll hear from unionists in the Postal Service, the mental health field, and education. We'll learn about the effects of budget cuts on the local community. We'll learn the alternatives to austerity, and we'll get responses from a state and elected official on what can be done at the government level. Inequality is not an accident. Let's look at tax policy. The US once had a progressive tax policy, higher income and higher taxes. No longer. Overall tax rate for the wealthiest Americans was around 70% in 1950, with a top rate of 91%. It's now around 23%. Middle and lower income people pay higher tax rates than the wealthiest. And wages. Since 1979, wages have been decoupled from productivity. Working harder doesn't mean higher pay. Although productivity continues to rise, worker pay has remained flat, and executive pay and profits have soared. CEO pay is almost 300 times that of worker pay. In 1978, that ratio was 30-1. And who is getting cut? There is a racist and sexist component to the budget cuts we are enduring now, and that will increase if we don't unite and act. Let's remember that the growth of the public sector employment after World War II contributed a great deal to raising the level of employment, income, and economic security among Black and brown workers and among women of all races. Eliminating these jobs and services will hurt these workers and LGBTQ workers first. A recent New Yorker article cited a study showing that as of 2019, 400 of America's richest individuals own some $3 trillion in wealth, more than all Black households and a quarter of all Latino households combined. And are these really wealthy individuals really generous? The Washington Post this week tracked the donations of the 50 richest Americans toward alleviating some of the misery of the COVID-19 pandemic. It compared each donation to the level of giving it would amount to if given by the median American. So Jeff Bezos, the world's richest man, whose net worth is $143 billion, gave a couple of $100 million. To the median American donor, this giving would amount to about $85. There's a growing movement to increase revenues by taxing the ultra-rich and by moving money out of the military budget and into funding people's needs. Unions are working together in a movement to bargain for the common good beyond the terms and conditions of a single union and building bridges between organized labor and communities. Everyone benefits from public sector services. The public sector is the embodiment of the social contract. We must protect it. I will now introduce our speakers. After their talks, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions using the chat link on your screen. Our first speaker is Diana Klein of American Postal Workers Union. Diana? Are you muted?
I'm muted.
You're good now.
I'm good.
Yep.
Now you can hear me? I'm good. All right. So thank you, everybody who's on the forum. And the post office is a very essential part of the American public. We've been around for 200 years. We deliver mail. We deliver mail in a very safe and trusted way. The public loves the post office. We've always done it without any tax dollars. We support ourselves. So we're a quasi-federal agency. They tell us what to do. We can't make our own rules, but we're a service, so we can't make any profit. So it's been very reliable and also very cost-effective. So the predicament we're in now, we're also considered essential employees. So we've been working through this entire COVID time period. So that means that we had to also follow the CDC guidelines for the COVID, so that if you were exposed to the virus, if you had the virus, you have to be out for 2 weeks. So the post office is covering that cost. There was an act that came out on April 1st from the federal government that also offered 12 weeks of childcare at 2/3 of the pay that the post office has to fund, because we're all a federal employee, so we're entitled to it. Meanwhile, the whole nation has shut down, so there's very, very little letters and flats coming through because there's no businesses open to generate any letters or flats. So that's down about 40%, but everybody's at home ordering packages, so the packages are up about 80%. It's like Christmas time in the post office, but at Christmas time, you have a whole different set of rules in the contract. You have Christmas help that they bring in, and because it's not Christmas, we're not getting any of that. So that's stressing out that part of the post office and the people. Just in the Northeast area alone, which is 10 districts that include ours, from just on the East Coast, we've had almost 3,900 people that have been out because either they had the virus, were exposed to the virus, had some kind of childcare issue, or didn't feel that they were compromised, that they couldn't come to work with the virus. So that's been put a strain because there's not as many people working in the larger plants, so that's slowing all the mail up. And then we have a president who hates the post office, wants to privatize it because that does generate money, but because we're a service, we're keeping the costs low. But he's got UPS and FedEx friends who they would love to give that money to make it a business. But we deliver to anybody in the whole country, no matter where you are, it's the same cost. And that would not happen if they were to privatize and a company would come in. They would do the parts that would make them, that would be very valuable and that they could make money off of, but they wouldn't serve the areas where it was going to cost them money. So on top of that, there's a board of governors that are supposed to govern what we do and how we do things. And there's supposed to be 9 people. Trump picked 5. The other 4 seats are vacant. And then we have a postmaster general who's retiring this month, as well as a deputy postmaster general, and they get picked by the board of governors. One person on that board of the 5 was somebody that the APWU was liked and that we could work with. Well, he quit in May. So now you're going to have people who Trump totally picked to pick the people that are going to run the post office, and they have no postal experience whatsoever, except that they're business people and they're going to look to make money on this whole thing. So that's a huge concern for the post office and for all of us that work there and for the public and what that's going to mean to them. So we're hoping that nothing happens until after the election. If we could get somebody else in, as president, the president does have the ability to get rid of a postmaster general. So that's the predicament that we're in. And so we're looking for Congress to give us some money because it's costing us so much money to cover everybody who's out, as well as we've lost 30 to 40% of the letters and flats, and we're not making as much money on the parcels because most of them are coming drop shipped from the private companies. And like on an Amazon piece, we make less than $1 on the packages that you bring in. That the returns, we make 7 cents on it, all those packages. So it's not, although the volume is there, it's not what we're making our money on. We were making our money on the letters and flats. And just in our local area, at the Mid-Hudson plant in Newburgh, the letters were down 30%. So they took the letters and sent them to Albany, because Albany was also down 30%. And then because there were so many packages coming out of Newark, where the priority center is, they're sending the parcels up to Newburgh. But we don't have any machinery, so they're doing 100,000 parcels a week by hand. And so it's been stressful for the workers there because we've done letters in that plant. We're a mail facility. Without letters, we're not a mail facility anymore. It's supposed to be temporary, but nobody knows what temporary means. It could be, it's been going on now for 3 weeks. It could be a month. It could be 6 weeks. It could be 4 months. Nobody knows. So of course the workers there are very unsure of what their future is because the trucks don't come in. You know, they sit around for a couple hours waiting for trucks to come in. Sometimes the trucks don't come in at all at night because there's a transportation issue. So it's very concerning that they should take all the letters out of that building and send them to Albany. And we all know that Albany really can't process them if the volume came back because they just don't have the space or the resources or the equipment to do it. So, but that's what they're doing. They're trying to find out where the needs are and then moving things around. And so it's been a very, very unsettling time for people who work in the post office at this point. So any questions?
Diana, we'll have a Q&A period at the end, but
Okay.
could you just mention the 75-year problem that the
Well,
is up against?
right, and that's started in 2006 when they did the Postal Act. The only reason we don't have, well, one of the big reasons we don't have money is because in 2006 they passed a law that we had to pre-fund our health, our retirement benefits for people who were not even hired yet, let alone born, and take 75 years worth and pay it back in over a 10-year period. So, and that was when the problem was the post office, we had money and the government wanted the money. So that was their way to take any money that we were making. And also they intended to bankrupt us so that we would have to go under because it was $5 billion a year. We paid for the first 5 years. And after that, after the 2008 came in with the recession and we couldn't pay it anymore. So we now owe the 5 years. So that's a bill that they have tacked on to us, that when you hear them tell you how much money the post office is in the hole, it's because of this manufactured funding that they were making us pay. So there have been bills presented to Congress to alleviate the last 5 years. At this point, we're not even looking to get the 5 years we paid in. Just don't bill us for those 5 years that we owe. And I got to say, you know, we've had a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress, and it's never happened. You know, that when they had the opportunity, they didn't do it then either. So that's very scary for us because, you know, we count on getting the support in Congress to get it done, but we get to a certain point and then it just doesn't happen. So, but that's why that's one of the reasons when they tell you that the post office has no money and there's such a hole, it's because of that pre-funding from 2006.
Thank you, Diana. Manufacturing
Thank you.
process. Thanks so much for letting us know. Our next speaker is Rich Steger from New York State United Teachers. Rich, can I find you?
Can everybody hear me okay?
A little louder.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So basically, NICET has earlier this year started a campaign called the Fund Our Future campaign. And that was done initially to raise awareness about, you know, raising new revenue sources because the state of New York has not fully funded foundation aid for almost 2 full decades. At this point, earlier this year, NICET was trying to get the new revenue sources, which are to tax the wealthy and the ultra wealthy, to have them pay their fair share to help to fully fund foundation aid. Now we're at a point with the pandemic that it's even more crucial because the governor is talking about massive cuts coming to education. I know firsthand what cuts to education look like, especially in Valley Central, where I'm the teacher union president. We had cuts, you know, over 10 years ago that we're just now rebuilding from that point. We lost all non-mandated specials at that time, and things like art, music, library. Those things were taken away from children in kindergarten right up through high school. Those programs, a lot of those programs were lost. We also went from a full-day kindergarten program to a half-day kindergarten program. If the state of New York cuts funding to education this year, those are some of the same type of cuts that we may see. We can't rebuild from that. We need to find new revenue sources that can come in and help the middle class tax homeowners pay their fair share, because the middle class homeowners are paying their fair share. The ultra wealthy are not. On top of that, we have the other issue with the pilots being given to all these large corporations. Again, in Valley Central, we have the Amazon plant coming in. That's an opportunity for an ultra wealthy corporation to pay their fair share. They're not doing that. They have tax breaks for the next 15 years, and that's unacceptable. I think at this point, we are at a crucial crossroads where if we do not seek and actually realize those new revenue sources by taxing the ultra wealthy and the wealthy their fair share, we're not asking them to give more than their fair share. We're just asking them to give their fair share. If we don't do that, education as we know it will change, and not just for the short term, but it will change for the long term for children who haven't even been born yet. That's what we're looking at this point. We're looking at this is no longer just to help fully fund foundation aid. This is to keep public education equal for everybody across the board. So we're looking right now for our legislators to look at the new revenue sources, such as the billionaire's wealth tax, the ultra millionaires tax, and the pied-à-terre tax. Things like the pied-à-terre tax is a tax on luxury second homes worth $5 million or more. Okay, again, this is not your primary residence. This is a luxury second home worth $5 million or more. And again, the millionaire's tax, it's to tax people with income over $5 million at a higher tax bracket, not at a bracket that is unfair, but at one that is higher for that amount of money. It's a progressive tax bracket, and it's been looked at by a lot of different economists, and it is definitely something fair, and it would not push any of our millionaires out of the state of New York.
Thank you, Rich. We'll hear from our attendees later on. People have questions for you. Next, from the mental health field, we have Christine Pettit and Vincent Vinieros of Public Employees Federation.
Yes, hello. Hi, everyone. Fellow labor brothers and sisters. My name is Christine Pettit. I'm going to be splitting this time with Vincent Viernes, my colleague. Thank you, Sparrow, for the invitation. Basically, we're representing PEF, Division 279, which represents the Office of Mental Health and OASIS. And we wanted to speak about basically our services for the services that we provide within the community and detrimental effects of budget cuts within the Hudson Valley. So we work for, again, the Office of Mental Health. So we have a clinic in Middletown, New York and Newburgh, New York. And I'm glad that Assemblyman Jacobson is on the call as well, because we cover his constituency and area, providing vital services, essential services within his and the Hudson Valley. Specifically, we have social workers, doctors, nurse practitioners, and nurses, rehab specialists that have been covering the area. We provide services for the severely and persistently mentally ill. And what that means are individuals that are in court-ordered treatment and individuals that other agencies do not want to treat. We have a housing crisis within the Hudson Valley, meaning that there are homeless individuals and mentally ill individuals that do not have housing, whether it's state agencies, group homes, or supported apartments. Currently, Orange County has a wait list of 700 individuals that are awaiting housing. Dutchess County has a similar wait list for housing. In addition, we have individuals that we treat in the community that do not have access to inpatient mental health services because of cuts that have continued over the years. we're really worried. The O agencies, meaning OASIS, OPWDD, and OMH, have continued zero balance budgets, meaning we've not had any increase in budget and continue to experience deficits with our state employees, with the potential of cuts, meaning 10 to 20% potential due to COVID and basically the deficit. The only result is going to be an increase in homelessness, an increase in violence, an increase of recidivism of the emergency rooms. Currently, I treat patients that are in the emergency room 3 to 4 times a week. Think of the cost that is costing our community. In a sense, these individuals have nowhere to go. They're court ordered, they're seeking services, they have no housing, and they're mentally ill. Severely mentally ill, so mentally ill that other agencies, including not-for-profits and private agencies, do not want to touch our patients. So we also have a special division where we also represent OASIS employees. So OASIS is a substance abuse provider within Orange County and Rockland County. It's Richard C. Ward and Blaisdell. Right now there's a waiting list for individuals to get inpatient substance abuse treatment. So any cut or any potential cut is just going to decrease beds or cut a program. And we know that the opioid epidemic continues. People are overdosing. We hear Governor Cuomo daily talking about how this COVID crisis has affected mental health, how it's affected substance abuse, domestic violence. We see individuals that are currently getting arrested because of their mental illness and in jail, and just creating this awful system and this continued system of individuals getting services or getting services in jail when they really need to be continuing services within the Office of Mental Health. Again, there's waiting lists of housing. We represent clinics. We have mobile mental health teams. We have intensive case management. And because of COVID, we have not stopped. We have not sheltered in. We continue to provide services, whether it's remotely. Not one of our offices have closed down. Individuals on the outpatient sector have gone inpatient. We've lost many patients due to COVID, and any budget cuts is going to continue to have direct effects on our community. This means people are going to be homeless. Substance abuse is going to increase. Just want to make sure I didn't cut anything out. And I know Assemblyman Jacobson, I know you're in Newburgh as well. We have a clinic in Newburgh, we have an ACT team, and we invite you to come join us, see our services and the vital essential services we provide, and defunding and continued budgets of 0% revenue are not going to help the community that you're representing. And I'm going to give it to Vincent Viernes, my colleague who's a social worker, to speak on behalf of services provided.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Good evening, union brothers and sisters. Good evening, Assemblyman Jacobson. Thanks, Christine, for speaking passionately about our cause. My name is Vincent Viernes. I'm a social worker for New York State OMH, Office of Mental Health. I've been a civil servant for about 14 years. I've been providing services to the mentally ill during that duration. I'm honored and humbled to speak on behalf of my PEF members and fellow labor activists in the Hudson Valley. I'm going to speak specifically on 2 programs. First one is the Sullivan County Mobile Mental Health Team. I worked for them for 10 years. Sullivan County is one of the counties in New York where services for the mentally ill are already overwhelmed. It is one of the poorest counties in New York. And when at my time there, and still now, the mental health services in Sullivan County is already overwhelmed. They're overbooked. There's waiting lists everywhere. Mobile mental health is able to refer clients to hospitals when they're in imminent danger to self and others. Basically, they save lives, and they provide other services when clients are in crisis. Sullivan County Mobile Mental Health diverts ER visits and hospitalizations, which is cost effective and saves Medicaid and Medicare costs. For example, a person in crisis, somebody seriously mentally ill, they just need somebody to talk to. They don't have anywhere to go to. There's a waiting list. They don't have a provider. They typically, when mobile wasn't there, they would go to the ER just to speak to somebody. We all know the cost of ER visits. Mobile mental health, we come in, they call us, 800 number, 1-800 number, and we're able to provide that support and divert hospitalization. Next, I'm going to talk about the ACT team. Me and Christine work for Orange County ACT team. We provide services to, like Christine said, seriously pervasive mentally ill, that population. We are a 9-person team consisted of nurses, nurse practitioners, social workers, a peer advocate, and administrative assistant. By the time an individual gets referred to ACT, they've had multiple hospitalizations, legal issues, and homelessness. Traditional outpatient services were not affected for such individuals. ACT provides intensive and dynamic approaches that significantly decrease and even eliminate ER visits and hospitalizations, legal issues, and homelessness for most of our clients. Through our advocacy, through the various interventions that we do. During the height of COVID and until today, while many agencies, like Christine said, are sheltered in, ACT continued to be in the front lines for injections. A lot of our clients are on injectable medications. You can't do that over the phone. Our nurses were out there providing injections, making sure clients have basic needs, the social workers, peer advocates, the team, basically. We were out there when the governor put in that everybody has to be out there with masks. We're out there providing masks for our patients, food, oral medications, providing interventions during crisis situations. In addition, we provided effective telehealth counseling services. But like I said, we continue to provide face-to-face interventions while practicing social distancing with PPEs and all that good stuff. We continue to provide the quality care despite a global pandemic. Mental health services as a whole is already running on bare bones, from public service to nonprofits. To further cut public services for the mentally ill will drastically put the burden on local and state inpatient behavioral units that are already constantly full. There's waiting lists everywhere. People who need hospitalization, they can't be hospitalized because there's no beds. As the country is looking for systematic changes to address the injustices to the vulnerable populations, we at PEF are concerned about the proposed cuts to state services and services for the mentally ill as a whole. It would be an injustice to cut services and funding for the mentally ill. While corporations are getting bailed out, the population we serve again gets the short end of the stick. I understand that we need revenue for the budget and the services, and I hope Assemblyman Jacobson and your colleagues are able to pass bills to generate much needed revenue and to find ways to save resources without affecting the services to the mentally ill. I want to thank you again for giving me this opportunity to speak, and I'm humbled to be side by side with the service providers of Hudson Valley and to speak for the mentally ill. Lastly, I also want to just say that I also hope that the essential workers of today, the heroes during this pandemic, did not get a pink slip for their dedication and hard work when all the dust settles. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vince. Our next speaker is Juanita Lewis. She represents Community Voices Heard in Newburgh and Poughkeepsie. Juanita, hi. You need to unmute yourself.
Oh, yes, I just did, sorry. So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to talk about, like the economy and how things are impacting members of CVH, including and union members and things of that nature. So just a quick background. So CVH has been around now for 25 and a half years, and it was an organization that was founded by women of color that wanted to have a voice and a say in how policies were being created around welfare reform and the social safety net. And so from there, we grew from just being in New York City and focusing on that issue to now having 3 chapters in the Hudson Valley. So we have a chapter in Yonkers, which is our Westchester hub, Newburgh for our Orange County, and then Poughkeepsie for Dutchess. And, I would have to say that the pandemic in particular has just really exacerbated and shown all the cracks that we already knew when it came to access for housing and rent, and access to healthcare, and for a lot of our members, some of the unsafe working conditions that they are in. So a majority of our members are women of color, predominantly Black, that are essential workers, right? So they're the ones who have not been able to work from home. They're the ones who are working in the hospitals. They're the ones that have to take different shifts for different people who are working in grocery stores. We have seniors that clearly had some underlying conditions and were concerned with what the pandemic was happening and what was happening to a lot of their friends and family. And then when you put that with the cost of rent and people being fearful of being able to pay rent. And, you know, knowing even though you have now 3 months of not being evicted if you don't pay your rent, but with that ending soon, the fear of having to pay all of that back. And then clearly connecting that to wages, having workers make enough money where they're able to pay their rent in places in the Hudson Valley. You know, we have a lot of members who are teachers assistants that now saw a lot of shifts when it came to teaching, right? Because everything now was at home. And, you know, in a lot of our calls with members, you know, we've had people talk a lot about what is it, the mental health now conditions that they're facing and experiencing because of one, just being inside for so long and with limited engagement with people that they care about, to the deaths that they were experiencing, and not being able to grieve for them the way they would want to. So we have a lot of members that are members of have particular faiths. So not being able to go to their institution of worship physically, or be able to go to a burial physically, like all of those things have just now just come full force under this global pandemic. And now you layer on the consistent murdering of black people, right, at the hands of law enforcement. So all of that trauma on top of, I got to figure out how I'm going to get back to work. Okay, I have to figure out how I'm going to pay rent. How am I going to get my kids to school when all of this ends? It's all of that with the stories and the relationships that we've been building, or that we've built with members, allows us to really think through what are the policies that we want to push for and that we want to make some differences on. So like in Newburgh, we're having the conversation, and I'm excited that Councilwoman Karen Mejia is on there, because we've been talking to her and other council members about right to counsel. So tenants have protections when they're going back into to court, and they have access to legal representation. We're having the same conversation down in Westchester. You know, we have, like I said, we have either tons of parents and also teachers assistants. So looking at what does school aid look like for our communities in Yonkers, in Newburgh, and Poughkeepsie, when we have clearly seen that there is a huge need with communities of color and low-income communities, and not having the adequate resources to do what needs to happen. And how does that add on to the worry and the fear for parents that they might have around what happens to their child when they go to school or when they come home? So that the opportunity for after school programs, and just having that safety, and that knowing that everything, you know, will either be okay, or at least be able to think about, what do I want to be when I grow up, right? And so not being able to have that now I don't want to say clarity, but like the luxury of actually being able to think about that. So, you know, with us fighting for a right to know, right to counsel, being able to fight for alongside with AQE and Citizen Action around more funding for public schools, clearly starting to work more with organizations around criminal justice reform. So the repeal of 50A and right to know legislation in different cities, like all of those things are happening for my members all at once. And so being able to be in relationship with other institutions that are fighting alongside or with us because they're experiencing those same things to make those changes are huge, right? And so, you know, whatever this is going to look like in terms of Albany and being able to talk to elected officials, being able to tell more of those stories to those that represent us up in Albany, and then look forward in the next couple of years to keep making this an issue, because we just don't see this going away.
Thank you, Juanita. Juanita, even before the Q&A, can I just ask you a quick question? Could you explain 50A to the folks?
Yes. Yeah. So, I'm sorry. I was on another call where we just talked about this. So repeal 50-A essentially is allowing more transparency around officers and their histories, right? So, like for instance, with the officer, the former officer in Minneapolis that murdered George Floyd, you know, there were already 18 violations and things against him, and no one knew that. And so being able to have a policy that would allow people to know what the disciplinary actions have been regarding an officer, you know, if there have been any things around misconduct, things of that nature. So it's more transparency.
Unmuting myself. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Ron Deutsch. Ron is the Executive Director of Fiscal Policy Institute. Ron, are you there? Hi, thanks.
I am. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Not too bad. Thank you all, to my union brothers and sisters and my community groups and Assemblyman Jacobson. Thank you all for the opportunity to be with you today. I've got a few slides that we wanted to put up as I was talking. I'll try and get through them quickly. All right. So where do we go from here is really the question, right? It's kind of what's happening with our New York State budget kind of post-pandemic. The next slide talks about, you know, the fact that just FPI works statewide, as all of you know. We work from Brooklyn to Buffalo and from Long Island to New York City to Plattsburgh. We're analyzing and doing research, educating and organizing around many of these issues. The next slide talks about the fact that, you know, we're experiencing record levels of unemployment in New York. I mean, we haven't seen anything like this before, right? There's over 2 million people unemployed right now in New York State. And when you look at who's unemployed, right, 98% of those folks are making less than $68,000 a year. So it's not the wealthy who are hurting right now. You know, it's regular folks who are out there day in and day out trying to make a living and stretch the dollar. And now we're talking about lots of different budget cuts right now that, you know, could threaten hundreds of thousands of additional jobs, as we saw and was evidenced after the financial collapse in 2008. So the next slide talks a little bit about the fact that you know, the governor in this year's budget got some extraordinary powers. I want to say he's like a superhero, but these are not good extraordinary powers in my opinion. But he basically, in the division of budget, has the ability to make cuts. So they set up various measurement dates, one of which we've completely blown through at this point in time, which is a good thing actually, that we haven't made cuts yet. But the governor has this power now to basically propose across the board budget cuts if revenues don't come in as anticipated. And the legislature only has 10 days to develop its own plan and respond to the governor's budget proposals. So the next slide clearly shows that we're, you know, in trouble when it comes to revenue, right? I mean, $61 billion in lost revenue through 2024, according to the state's division of budget. This year's budget gap is now at $13 billion, requiring an additional $10 billion in cuts. We're looking at about $8.3 billion from aid to localities, and that's basically a budget bill that funds all of our services in New York. Everything from public education to healthcare to human services to transportation. And then we're looking at an additional $1.6 billion from state agencies that are already been cut to the bone. So we're really talking about 20% across the board cuts that would just be absolutely devastating. And we just cannot let this happen. The next slide shows that, you know, already we've started to freeze revenue to local governments. And that's having an impact already, right? I mean, we're hearing about local layoffs. We're hearing about nonprofits not getting contracts with the counties where they used to. So, you know, and counties and cities, towns and villages, I mean, counties are already predicting, you know, billions in lost revenue as a result of loss of sales tax, hotel occupancy taxes, all of these things that revenue streams that counties rely on. The next slide talks a little bit about the fact that, you know, we're all in this holding pattern, right? I mean, the governor is very clear. He doesn't want to do anything until Washington acts. And Senator McConnell seems to be in no rush to move forward the HEROES Act, which would get New York State about $34 billion just for the state. It would get local governments money, tribal governments money. This needs to happen. We need to move this. 46 other states have budgets that start on July 1, and we thought McConnell was going to, wanted to hold off a little bit and kind of swoop in and save all of these states at the last minute. But the way things are looking right now, we just don't know when this is going to happen. So the question is, can we keep waiting for Washington to act? The next slide talks a little bit about our vision for what we should be doing, right? We absolutely need and deserve federal assistance to New York. We give the federal government tens of billions of dollars more a year than we get back in services. So, hey, maybe we could just take a break for a year and you could just give us our money and that would really help us a lot. But there's also the Federal Reserve Bank has set up a municipal liquidity facility, which provides up to $500 billion to state and local governments of a certain size, and cities of a certain size at nearly 0% interest. So, that's another option that we should look at. And also, of course, generating new revenues from the very wealthy and those at the top. So the next slide talks a little bit about, who will pay to close this budget gap. If we don't ask the wealthy to pay a little bit more, what's going to happen? We're talking about massive cuts in public services and housing and education and healthcare. And these are going to disproportionately fall on the same people who, have been victims of the COVID crisis as well, right? Poor communities of color, they've been hardest hit by COVID. They've been hardest hit by, with the highest infection rates and disproportionate death rates. And at the same time now, we're going to add insult to injury by making huge cuts in services that many of these folks also rely on. Next slide talks about what can we do about it, right? We know a couple of things, right? New York has the greatest income inequality of any state in the nation. The wealthy aren't paying their fair share in terms of a proportion of income. So, we can do something about this, right? So we talk about a billionaire's tax. Basically what that would do is it would tax capital gains on a quarterly basis instead of just when people sell things, or, they're holding on to this and they're making money over time. When you tax a billionaire, guess what? They're still a billionaire. They live where they want to live. They're not going to flee. If a billionaire is in New York, it's because they want to be in New York. It's not because they're saying, oh, well, New York is going to charge me 1% more than some other state. It doesn't matter when you're a billionaire. At least that's what I'm told. I would love to find out myself, but I don't think that'll ever happen. But then an ultra-millionaire's tax, right? We're talking about an additional income tax surcharge basically on people making more than $5, $10, $100 million a year. If you're making that kind of money right now in this environment, you sure can afford to pay a little bit more. And
Can you make that chart bigger? Because you got very small print there. Your face is very big, but that's very small. I'd like to see the details. I can't read it. It's so small.
Sorry. I don't know if...
No, not you, the chart.
Yeah, I don't think I'm in control of it. I'm sorry.
I think, Jonathan, if you minimize the speaker's piece of it, then the presentation...
How do you do that?
Well, I'll keep talking while you figure it out, and I'll be happy to share the slides with you all as well. So, but the reality is we can generate billions of dollars from an income tax surcharge on the wealthy. Again, we talk about a pied-à-terre tax, which was already described, but I mean, we're talking about a 0.5% to 4% tax on second, third, fourth, fifth homes valued at over $5 million. We're also talking about a stock transfer tax. This is something that was in place between 1905 and 1980 in New York. So it's a very small tax on the sale of stocks. And right now what we're doing is we're collecting it and we instantly rebate it right back to the brokers that pay it to the tune of $13 billion a year. I mean, think about that. That's frightening. I mean, you know, the stock market is doing pretty darn well. And we know that billionaires have increased their net worth during this pandemic. Their net worth hasn't gone down. And then there's another issue of people using private equity financing to purchase properties, and they're basically avoiding a mortgage recording tax. So the city comptroller basically showed that 80% of the sale of units in New York City valued over $5 million are cash sales. Imagine that, right? Wouldn't that be nice? The rest of us, you know, buy a house, get a mortgage, pay a mortgage recording tax, like everybody else. So, you know, there are all these different loopholes that the wealthy can avail themselves of that we need to close. So the next slide talks about the fact that we've done this before. There's precedent for this over the last 100 years in New York State. Every time there's been a crisis or a depression or a recession, governors have looked to the wealthy to pay a little bit more, and rightfully so, right? Whether it was FDR or Herbert Lehman, Nelson Rockefeller. In the last 2 decades, we saw it with Speaker Silver and Majority Leader Bruno coming together in a bipartisan fashion, asking the wealthy to pay a little bit more. And George Pataki, the then governor, vetoed that, and they overrode his veto in a very bipartisan fashion. And then, of course, Governor Patterson as well increased taxes on the wealthy after the financial collapse in 2008, and then that's when we saw the first millionaires tax really in New York, which still exists today. And then finally, the next slide, which you probably can't see, talks about the poll that was discussed. And yes, 90% or more of voters support all 3 of the taxes: the billionaires tax, the increased income tax on the ultra wealthy, and the tax on luxury homes, or pied-à-terre, pardon my French. You know, the other astounding part of this poll was that 72% of respondents said that they would be more likely to vote for a member of the legislature that supported all 3 of these taxes. So people get it, right? They know that the system, the tax system is upside down in New York, and that the wealthy are not paying their fair share. And the final slide is just questions. Oh, that was easy. So I just wanted to kind of run through that information with you. Happy to share this slide deck or have it shared with everybody. You know, and I provided some additional information in the chat space as well. So please, you know, if you have any questions in the future, other than today, please feel free to reach out to us. That's what we're here for at the Fiscal Policy Institute. We are working with the Assembly. We are working with the Senate members right now. We are working with working groups within those to really get ready and be prepared when the governor, if and when the governor comes out with these 20% across the board cuts. We need to have an alternative solution.
Thank you so much, Ron. You're absolutely right. We need that alternative. We need to raise funds rather than continue to cut budgets. And thank you for the rationale for that we can now take into our community groups and unions and lobbying efforts and so on. So thanks. So our last speaker is Jonathan Jacobson, New York State Assembly member from the 104th District. Jonathan?
Well, thank you very much. I've got a lot to go through because all the speakers mentioned a lot of great things, and I want to comment on them, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions. I just want to say from the outset, we were all horrified on the killing of George Floyd, and but given the outpouring of support and I'm talking about the protests that throughout the country, I'm hopeful that there's going to be meaningful action and reform. We're going to be passing a criminal justice package probably starting Monday in Albany. We had a 3.5-hour conference, Zoom conference just before this, going over it, including the repeal of 50A. It might be in a different version than what the bill is now, but that's going to be there. I'll be supporting the whole package, so I'm hopeful what's going on. He mentioned about inequality. I mean, to me, it's really it starts with education. To me, education has always been the great equalizer. The problem is we can't, and I've been trying to, I've been talking about this for a while. I'm working on it behind the scenes. You can't keep funding education based on the property tax. It's unfair. It's unfair to the taxpayer because it's not based on the ability to pay. It's unfair to the student because that means that the quality of education is based on the wealth of the district. I mean, if we were going to start all over, we wouldn't have so many school districts, which is sacrosanct. I mean, people go crazy on that, but you would have larger areas. And then, but the main thing is you could have funding from Albany through the income tax, and you wouldn't have to worry about the property tax. But every time that gets in, you have some districts say, well, you're saying that I can't put in a super duper computer lab if we want to pay for it. So you always have these problems. I mean, there's a lot of things there. I think that the fact that we had to go through online teaching for the last about 3 months now has showed us a new appreciation of teachers by the parents, but also the fact that the kids, I think, basically lost a good half a year, if not more. A lot of people live in internet deserts. I just put in a bill that would require every internet company that provides service to a municipality to provide basic internet service to every person. It would have to go to every residential home, every residential unit. The way it would be paid for is whatever that cost is would be spread out among the other customers. That's what we did with electricity at the beginning of the last century, and we can do this with the internet. It's a utility, and we have to do that. So that's going to take a while, but go from there. On the post office is mentioned in the Constitution. It was one of the specific powers given to the federal government. And yes, and the problems occurred during the Bush administration when you had to pay the pension. I would hope that that's something, it's too important. It cannot be funded solely on campaign mail, although I try to do that when I run. But we've got to support that. It's an essential service. I got to mention about the school board elections. There's been a big screw up because too many of the districts relied on NTS, one vendor, to send out the ballots. And in my district, I have 5 school districts, and 3 of them that I know of, Poughkeepsie, Beacon, and Marlboro, have problems. They got out the ballot late. They got the ballot out. Some of them only got it out this past Monday. Some only got it out Wednesday, maybe Thursday. So what I did was with Peter Harcum, who represents, he's from Westchester, he has Putnam and a small part of Dutchess. We've got a bill in to extend the election date to the 16th, which would allow more time for ballots to get through. Hopefully we can either pass it on Monday, or the governor is going to issue an executive order, since he created by executive order be the easy way. We're not sure whether he's going to go for a full week. We hear he might agree just to have that it would be postmarked by the 9th and not have to be received. So I'm working hard on that to try to get that done. I brought that up today in conference. So hopefully they know, everybody knows about it now. I know that Peter Harcum and Shelley Mayer, who's chair of the Education Committee in the Senate, had a conference call with some of the governor's people. I was keeping appraised of the situation. Concerning unemployment, a bill that I just put in, we're going to have a problem as we start to go back to work, where a lot of workers are going to be fearful of going back to work because they fearful of catching COVID. And so I have a bill in that says that if you decide that that you're fearful of catching COVID and you decide to leave that employment, it would not be considered a voluntary withdrawal, so that you would still get your unemployment. So I have that bill in, and I'm working on that. Now, as all of you know, I'm a proud Democrat and devoted my whole adult life to making us competitive here in the Hudson Valley, and certainly we've done that. But I've never been afraid to speak up when I think the governor, who's a Democrat, does the wrong thing. When it came to nursing homes, the fact that he had a directive from the health department to say that every nursing home had to take a patient, even if they were COVID positive, was just an abomination. I know why he was doing that. He was trying to free up hospital rooms, but the nursing homes are not hospitals. Very few have enough. They don't have enough staff as it is in normal times. They didn't have enough staff just to treat the COVID patients, and most of them didn't have the space to have the COVID patients separated properly. But the way it was done originally, they were too scared to say no because they're always afraid of losing their license. So I just, the governor then eventually backtracked on that, though he technically didn't withdraw that directive, but he backtracked, saying that if they couldn't handle it, then they wouldn't have to take them. So he directed that the staff people at the nursing homes be tested twice a week for COVID. But he said nothing about the residents, nothing about the residents. So I have a bill in that will say that during the COVID emergency, you have to test all the residents once a month, and then after anybody tests positive, because during that period. So if a staff member tests positive between the monthly tests, you want to test the residents. So I have this bill in, and I think we're going to come back more than next week, even though technically the session was supposed to end on June 2nd. We're coming back because we weren't there for weeks. As far as getting into let me go one other thing here before I get into the cuts or proposals and things like that.
If I could just interrupt you, Jonathan, if we could focus on the cuts or wait until the Q&A and answer the questions about the cuts, because we're starting.
I was going to mention about the tenant. What we did for tenant emergency relief, they're taking $100 million from the federal government. So if anybody is earning less than 80% of area median income, which is about $70,000, which is most people affected in Newburgh and Poughkeepsie, and they had a burden with more than 30% of their income, and they have lost income since March 7th, their rent would be paid. The balance of their rent would be paid through the month of July. So I wanted you to know that. We didn't forget about that, and we're doing things. Unfortunately, the only entity that can print money is the federal government. And I think everybody knows that. And that's why we've been waiting and we haven't done the cuts. I'm on all the bills, I believe, on as far as the millionaires tax and changing in different things. I think that it would generate, I think it wouldn't generate as much as people think this year because of the shortened tax season and what's left. That's a problem. And I don't know if the numbers are correct. I was told including all of the taxes. But I am in favor of that. I think it has, I don't want to have us, in fact, if anything, we need more teachers if we're going to have less children in each of the classrooms. I mean, that would be a good thing. I don't know how we're going to solve the school bus issue, because I don't think we can't have the kid, you don't want the kids next to each other. On the other hand, what does that mean? We're going to have three times as much buses? I mean, I don't know if we can afford that, but that's a problem that yet to be done. So I am in favor of that. And I think that what I'd like to see maybe is that we don't have to cut all at once. Maybe we could say, hey, if we do have to have some cuts, let's not cut all at once. And that might make it more difficult for the school districts and others to plan. But if the economy comes back, I see most of our income is through everyday income tax throughout the board. And, so maybe once the economy comes back, we'll have the money so we don't have to do it. You mentioned two things, and I'm going to be honest with you because I'm not just going to sugarcoat anything. I don't think that if you start borrowing for day-to-day expenses is a good thing. That's what happened in New York City. That's what happened in Newburgh. You put things on a credit card. And I don't know if borrowing for day-to-day expenses. As far as most of those taxes you said work, the problem with the stock transfer tax or something like that is unlike maybe 40 years ago, 50 years ago, the stock exchange doesn't need to be in New York City. That is a problem. And we get a lot of money out of Wall Street. Got a lot of big salaries, a lot of big things. So a consideration has to be made that if you put this tax on there and then another state says, hey, come on down to our state and we're not going to tax you, that could be a problem. So I just think that tax, while it sounds simple, I think there's always unintended consequences. I know that's not the popular thing to say on this. I know it's not the popular thing to say here, but I got to say that. I got to say exactly where I'm coming from. I got to be a straight shooter. I do think that
I'm going to have to cut you a little bit short, although it's not really short, and you'll have an opportunity to answer individual questions, but I want to give you the opportunity to ask questions, and thank you. And now my union sister, Beth Wilson, will moderate the Q&A. Thank you very much to all the speakers, and thank you, Beth.
Yes, thanks, Donna. Thanks to all the presenters for bringing their experiences and ideas to this discussion. We've got a couple of questions that have come up in the Q&A. I would like to encourage anybody who's on the meeting now, if you have questions, to put them in the Q&A chat option, and we'll pick them up there and give you a chance to bring your questions basically in the order that we're getting them. I just want to make a couple of comments, just reminding us all that, we, the workers, are the ones who are doing the productive labor in our society. We're taking care of people. We're educating our children and our young people. We're, helping the communications network of the mail happen. All of these wonderful things that takes care of everybody in our society. And, who's providing this labor is us. And as Ron quite eloquently pointed out in his presentation, when time for cuts come, who is harmed the most? Us. And not the people who are doing, manipulating capital on the stock market. Who are raking in billions from the CARES Act that just happened, and turning it into stock buybacks and other kind of unproductive things to do in society. So when, when our governor, Cuomo, who never saw a cut he didn't like, is going to be coming down the pike at us very soon, who's bearing the brunt of the austerity? It's us. Who suffers from the cuts to public services? Regular people. The super wealthy in our state are not suffering because of cuts that are being made, right? They have plenty of wherewithal to live in a gated community or have their penthouse apartment in Manhattan or whatever the hell else it is that they're doing. They have plenty of money to kind of cushion themselves. Those of us who are living paycheck to paycheck, or the communities, you know, the people that Juanita quite eloquently talked about, who are, you know, suffering from wondering about how will they make up 3 months worth of rent that they haven't paid when it comes due, and all the other burdens that we're all suffering through. There's, you know, it's up to us to start organizing ourselves. So at this moment, at this really critical moment in our history, I mean, I'm 50, never seen a moment in my lifetime like this one, where we have some kind of a chance at turning around a lot of these questions. If we're going to flip the script on how these things have been worked, you know, the kind of neoliberalism and austerity that we've been subjected to for the past 40 years, this is our moment as workers to come together and try and do something about it. I just want to mention that we are in the process of organizing, following some kind of request that was coming from the National AFL-CIO for organizing of car caravans across the country. You know, some of it got postponed because of the unrest that's been going on around the George Floyd murder and those issues. But we are hoping to have one in Kingston on Saturday, June 20th. We're in the process of, you know, trying to talk to the officials in Kingston and so on. So just stay tuned for additional announcements and updates that'll be coming from the ALF about that. And we're hoping with the car caravan that to have, you know, sort of a safe, peaceful protest that calls attention to the work that we're doing, and to, you know, demand from both the federal government and from our state government the kind of support that we need to continue doing the work and supporting ourselves and contributing to society that we're all doing. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn to, we've got a couple of questions that came up in the Q&A box. The first one a long time ago was from Karen Mejia. So I'm going to turn on the mic. So Karen, if you're still with us, are you here?
Hey, yeah.
Okay, so if you want to go ahead and ask your question, please.
No, I was just looking for, you know, the interconnection and the interrelation of all of the issues that are being raised, right, both social and political, and looking to see how local government can better partner with our, with the labor. Sorry, I don't know what just happened. But anyways, I was just looking to see where there's some partnerships on how to best connect all of these different issues that are related, and how, you know, we bring in diverse communities of colors in the Hudson Valley and the changing demographics into the conversation as well. So looking for partners who want to get into some good trouble in 2020.
Okay, does anyone of the panelists want to respond to that? Or I like the idea, sounds good to me.
I would respond by saying that, you know, I think we need, you know, we should be having our county executives, our mayors, our town officials, you know, they should be clamoring as well for looking at taxing the wealthiest among us in order to preserve services being provided at the local level, services being provided at the state level. They all have a vested interest in this as well. They don't want to go to their constituents and say, you know, we can't fill potholes, we can't pave roads, we can't collect garbage, we can't provide water service. You know, all these things are potentially going to be impacted. And I think the reality is that, you know, 97% of the folks that would be impacted by this are in, you know, New York City, Long Island, Westchester, Rockland, and Orange counties. 3% of millionaires are in the rest of the state. So, you know, asking more for those with the means to pay more helps the entire state. And we've pointed this out time and time again. So, you know, I think we need folks on both sides of the aisle who have a vested interest in preserving services in New York to, you know, stand up and tell the governor that as well.
Well, one thing I would like to do that I think would solve a lot of what I think we have to do, if we look to the 30s, during the Depression, when Roosevelt started, he started the WPA. And I think we can do the same thing and redo our infrastructure, which is really needed. And that includes I would love to see burying in the ground the transmission lines so that every time there's a windstorm or a snowstorm or a rainstorm, we're not just holding our fingers and that. But I'd also like to see that. I think that if we invest that way, it would be considered an investment and money would come back and we could hire a lot of people on that. I've been talking about it. Pat Fay from Albany has been talking about it. So I think that could happen. Something to be done, which I would like to see. I also think that the problem we had a lot in the budget, and see the problem with the budget, they put the good stuff in with the bad stuff. So the same bill that had the prevailing wage bill, which is great for unions and everybody, because that's better for when people work in construction, they had some ugly stuff. So there were cuts for Medicaid services and for those healthcare workers that visit people in their house. But once you cut that, that means there's a chance more people are going to go to nursing homes, which is the most inefficient, most expensive way to care for these people. So that was something that was totally wrong. It's not going to be easy. I mean, it's going to be tough, but I'm hoping that if we can get through by a certain time, maybe then we don't have to do all the cuts. And then eventually, as the economy comes back, once it starts opening, there was a big thing today about the unemployment number going down to only 12.5%. Well, I think in the Hudson Valley, it's closer to 25% from what I've seen last report. So, we're certainly not out of the woods. It's going to take a while, and New York City hasn't opened yet. So once that happens and you have more money, then we can put off the cuts. That's what I'm hoping. And what you said about Mitch McConnell waiting to July 1st, so then he can hear from red states and about the problems they're having. I think there will be some federal aid, probably not as much, but I do believe what you said there was correct. I've heard the same stuff, and to go from there.
Alan, so I'm going to turn on the mic for you, who has a question related to both the federal budget, which Jonathan just touched on.
Yeah, I'm absolutely in favor of taxing the rich. I mean, it's a shocking thing that hasn't happened until now. But if all our tax money is being channeled into military on a federal level and police on a local level, then taxing the rich isn't going to solve our problems alone. I think that the union movement really needs to address the issue of the military budget eating up more than 50% of the federal budget. And on a local level, police are eating up an enormous amount. I can't remember the statistic in New Paltz where I live, but it's very, very high. And other agencies are struggling. I mean, they raise the taxes every year in my town in order to just keep the agencies functioning. Until those two problems are solved, it seems to me, we're going to be knocking our heads against the wall.
Well, I don't think anybody on this panel, anybody on this conference disagrees with that. That the problem is that I don't think that you can decide how you want to spend federal money, and I don't think that creating jobs through the defense industry is as good as creating other types of jobs where it's helping people directly. So, and I think there's been an over explosion in the last 3 years on spending on federal money, spending federal money on the military for really no reason other than that the occupant in the White House can brag that he spent more money. And we should never use the armed forces as policemen and never to go after people who are exercising their First Amendment rights. So that was horrific as well.
Okay, I saw a statistic today that in New York City, the NYPD costs this past fiscal year, $5.6 billion they spent on police just in New York City, which is more than all their budget for housing, for supporting homeless people, for youth programs, I mean, a whole string of things. If you add all of those things together, it's not as much as the police budget. So I'd like to support what Naomi's saying in the idea that perhaps we need to rethink how we're deploying the resources that we have. Instead of thinking of police as the answer to everything, perhaps rethinking what the role of the police in our society can and should be, bringing that funding down and using some of that, using that money to actually support human responses and, mental health counseling and all the panoply of things that are historically underfunded. Also, the federal defense budget that was passed for this year was, I believe, $718 billion. I might add that it actually carried through Congress with not just Republican votes. The Democratic House voted that in as well. We need to start making our priorities known to our lawmakers, and to organize ourselves as workers, as a voice for people and not for defense contractors in Washington and in other places. Yeah, Donna?
Yeah, I agree with Naomi and Beth on the need to reduce the military budget. The military budget isn't seen as a social good. It's a profit center. You've got military contractors who are making stuff that's then going to be destroyed when they blow it up in a war. And then wars are declared so that you can get more of that stuff. There's very little of real principle involved in having such a bloated military budget. And I think that our legislators and whoever have heard it all before, but we don't have enough people communicating loud and clear in the street about the need to stop the military budget. When we're in the throes of a war, for example, or we're about to go into a war, for example, the Iraq War, and certainly we all know about Vietnam, but let's just talk about the recent period. When the war in Iraq was about to begin, we had millions of people in the street. The leadership of this country didn't listen. They went ahead and declared war. And then what happened? The peace movement went away. Instead of saying that, okay, we lost this round and now we're going to fight even harder, they stopped fighting. Or the fight was reduced to such an extent that it was easy to just dismiss that movement. Well, we have to know that history and we have to stop being dismissed. I think the labor movement is a great source of energy and people and movement, and we have to do what we've been talking about in our small conversations and large, and not just think about terms and conditions, not just think about our own contracts, not just think about what do we care about, what do we think of the AFL-CIO, what do we think of our leadership, what do we think of the Democrats and Republicans, but really unite on the issues that at a human level will make all the difference for this country. And one of those is the war machine.
Thank you, Donna. We've got one more question that I've got in the queue from Jim Barber. So I'll just open up the mic for Jim. Are you with us?
I have to unmute my own mic. So yeah, I had a question. I think Ronald mentioned the Federal Reserve has a fiscal liquidity fund for municipalities. How exactly does that work?
Yeah, so the Federal Reserve Bank has a new municipal liquidity facility, it's called. They've got up to $500 billion in lending to states and cities with over 250,000 people, counties with more than 500,000 residents. Also multi-state entities like the Port Authority, which is looking to borrow from the MLF right now, you know, to help with their cash flow issues. I mean, the state's in a similar situation, right? Since, you know, the tax deadline was moved to July 15th instead of April 15th. That created basically a $10 billion cash flow problem for New York immediately. You know, we're collecting, we were scheduled to collect a lot of money in April that we are not collecting now. So it can be used as a short-term stopgap measure. And, you know, when the bank, when they, you know, gave money, the Federal Reserve provided money to the banks in the late 2000s financial collapse, those monies weren't repaid. So, you know, there's also the potential that states would not have to repay this money. I know, you know, a lot of the rules and regulations are a little fuzzy and continuously changing. But in my opinion, right, I guess before you make $10 billion in cuts that are going to have a disastrous impact, you need to weigh that against your other options. And to Assemblyman Jacobson's point, you know, there may be some taxes in the mix here where, like for the income tax, if they do it on a 2020 basis, right, you're only going to get a quarter of the year for that tax increase. So that would be January through April 2021.
What I would suggest that instead of borrowing for costs, if we could refinance some of the debt that New York State has using that program, then you could have that money saved perhaps to go into the normal costs. That might be another way of doing it as well, that would seem more palatable. So maybe you could use it it's like refinancing your house at a lower interest rate. So maybe that could be done, and then you would be able to free up some cash.
Right. I just think that the option of the cuts is far worse.
No, I agree. I'm just saying, no, I was saying using the Federal Reserve like you talked about. That's a very interesting idea. And I'll ask and I'll discuss that with the staff at Ways and Means on that. And I like to, I'm always trying to learn more. So if I can find out some more, it's a good idea, I'll steal it, okay?
Sounds like a plan.
And I guess
You have to talk to Ron Kim because he's already got a bill.
What's that?
Assemblyman Kim already has a bill on this as well. So you might want to check that out, Assemblyman.
I guess part of my question was, I'm running for Senate in the 51st district. We have a lot of rural municipalities, so they're small, clearly not going to qualify for this. But I look at it as a way for them to defer making those massive layoff decisions because they just don't know yet what their financial circumstances will be a year from now. But they're trying to make layoff decisions, budget decisions without really knowing. So if there a way they could delay, you can do that for a year, it would really help, I think, mitigate some of the impact in the rural areas.
Rural areas would be hit particularly hard, as well as, you know, urban areas. So I mean, no one's going to be spared from 20% across the board reductions. I promise you that.
Right. I guess I would just say, because the limits of that, you had to be such a large municipality or entity to even access that is not going to help us.
Right. You're right.
Okay, well, thanks for that question, Jim. We've gotten to the end of our time now. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to end things here, but we've had a really good discussion. We got a lot of really great information. I want to thank everybody who participated, all of our panelists, as well as everybody who sat through the meeting and who called up and dialed in. So please stay tuned because we're going to be doing these on first Fridays each month moving forward. I'm trying to do two things at once with my screen here. So on that note, I'm going to sign off with a union song.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.